Welcome to this week's virtual drasha. This week we have the incredible privilege to read Parshas Balak. In Parshas Balak, we're told of the story of Balak, the king of Moab, who sees the approaching Jewish army. He sees the fall of his fellow monarchs of Sichon and Og, and he recognizes that the Jewish threat cannot be met with normal military or physical might, but rather he needs some spiritual weapon. So he decides to hire Bilam, who is a Gentile prophet, and hopefully Bilam could go and interact with God, convince God, somehow bring down some divine wrath upon the Jewish people and stop their approach into the land of Canaan. But we know the story. Bilam, although HaKadosh Baruch Hu tries to tell him from the beginning, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Bilam is convinced that this is his destiny, this is his duty, this is his moment to shine, and so he goes. And every single time Bilam opens up his mouth to curse the Jewish people, not only is he unsuccessful in cursing them, but he actually delivers some of the most beautiful and prolific praise of Klal Yisrael. Praise that is so beautiful and so prolific that some of it is even incorporated in our daily davening. In fact, if you take a look in Parak Daled Pasuk, chapter 24, verse 5, the Torah says, "Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkin osecha Yisrael." Literally translated, how good are your tents, Yaakov? Oel is a tent. Mishkan osecha, a mishkan, which is a dwelling, a domicile. Your domiciles, your dwellings, Yisrael. So it appears that Bilam is extolling, he's praising the homes of the Jewish people. And Rashi points out, what is it that he's praising exactly? Bilam saw that when they pitched their tents in the desert, they did so in a very modest fashion. They would make sure that the entrance of one tent would not be opposite the entrance of another tent, giving each and every family their own privacy, maintaining a level of tznius, a level of modesty throughout the camp. And Bilam was so taken by this. Bilam, and we know from the end of the parasha, Bilam ultimately, again, it was from such an immoral culture, was so taken by the morality, by the modesty, by the tznius of the Jewish people. The great tzaddik, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, raises a fascinating question. He says, isn't the pasuk redundant? In other words, say one phrase or the other. Either, Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, how beautiful are your tents, Yaakov, or Mishkan osecha Yisrael, your dwellings, Yisrael. In other words, it's the same idea. It's the same theme. Bilam is extolling the virtue of the Jewish home. So either say one phrase, ohalecha, or Mishkan osecha. Why both? Of course, the simple answer is that Bilam was delivering almost like we'll call it a poetic praise. Sometimes in poetry there's inherent redundancy and it's done for style, it's done for form, but this is not regular poetry, this is Torah. This is Torah. As such, ask the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, how are we to understand the inclusion of both phrases? And the Rebbe says something so beautiful. He says, what's the difference between an ohel and a mishkan? And the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says an ohel is something temporary, versus a mishkan is a more permanent dwelling domicile. So Bilam is praising two things. Matovu ohalecha, Yaakov, how beautiful are your temporary dwellings, mishkan osecha Yisrael, and your permanent dwellings. And the Rebbe says something overwhelmingly profound. The Rebbe says there are two different kinds of Jews. Now the truth is there are many more than two different kinds of Jews, but for our purposes today, there's two different kinds of Jews. There are Jews who are episodically spiritual. In other words, people who find inspiration, people who are connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at times, at intervals. Maybe it's because of a life cycle event, maybe it's because of a calendrical event, maybe it's because they've suffered a terrible defeat, a wonderful success. There are times in which they are connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and there are times in which they're not. And then there are other people. This other group of people are able to maintain a sense of consistency in their spirituality. They're always connected. They're always on. By the way, always doesn't mean always, but more often than not, they're connected, they're on, they're engaged. Two types of spiritual relationships with Hashem. And says the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, these two relationships are captured in the Ohel Mishkan dynamic. And Ohel is in temporary structure. That refers to a person, Matovu ohalecha Yaakov. That refers to the Jew, says the Baal Shem Tov, who isn't always connected, who isn't always inspired, who isn't always engaged. Maybe it's the Jew with episodic spirituality. Sometimes I'm in, and when I'm in, it's great, it's fantastic, and then a lot of times I'm somewhat checked out. I'm uninterested, maybe I'm even apathetic. And then there's the Mishkan Osech Yisrael, there's the Mishkan Jew, the Jew who dwells perpetually in the home of spirituality, a constant and ongoing relationship and commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And says the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, Bilam sees Klal Yisrael and he sees something amazing. Bilam says to himself, I thought that when it comes to a relationship with God, it's all or nothing. Either you're in or you're out. And being in means being in all of the time. Being in means being part of it all the time. And if you're just episodically spiritual, if you're just engaged, sometimes yes, sometimes no, then that's absolutely meaningless. But says Bilam, I see the God of this people. He loves his children so much that whenever they engage, whenever they're willing to show up, this God is willing to embrace them, accept them, and appreciate them. This is the meaning, says the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, of Matovu Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkin Osecha Yisrael. In the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even if I'm just an Ohel Jew, I'm not always engaged, but sometimes I am. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate whatever you can give. I appreciate whatever level of engagement you're ready for. I appreciate whatever level of commitment you can make. I appreciate whenever you decide to show up. Mishkan Osecha Yisrael, obviously the goal is not to be an Ohel Jew, but the goal is to be a Mishkan Jew. The goal is not to have episodic spirituality. The goal is to be constant and consistent. But lest you think for a moment that episodic spirituality is not meaningful in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there could be nothing further from the truth. And I think herein lies such a unique aspect of our relationship with Hashem. Because think about this in just a moment. In general, the hallmark of any relationship is consistency. Imagine for a moment in your marriage, I've given this mashal, I've given this parable many times, right? Imagine in your marriage, you say to your wife, listen, I'll use the example of a wife. Say to my wife, I love you, you're so special to me. Here's the deal. On Sundays, Tuesdays, and alternate Fridays, I'm going to be the best husband in the world. It sounds a little bit like, if you're from New York, like alternate side of the street parking. Right? Sundays, Tuesdays, alternate Fridays, I'm here. I'm going to do whatever you need me to do. I'm going to be attentive. I'm going to even be mechavim to what it is that you want, what it is that you need. The best husband in the world. The rest of the week, I'm not really going to be around. It's me time. See, I'm going to focus on me. I'm going to focus on what I need. So the truth is, you don't have to be a marriage therapist to know relationship is probably not going to last. Because if you're just episodically committed, not going to work. And the truth is, it's true with your employer. Imagine telling your employer, listen, thank you so much for the opportunity. What a great job. Here's the deal. To me, I'd like a schedule of working Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays until noon. And then I like to have the long weekend. Okay, but when I'm there, I'm going to give you 1,000%. But the rest of the week, this is for a full-time job. The rest of the week, no, I'm sorry, I'm not here. I'm sure the employer will thank you for coming in, and then probably show you the door. In almost every life relationship, you need a heightened sense of consistency. One would have thought that the same applies to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Ribono Shalom tells us, of course, he wants consistency because he wants a relationship with us. But lest you think that if we're inconsistent, what we do doesn't matter. See, people think this. That, come on, maybe I'm not the person who davens every day. So today I'm going to daven. So what? What one day of davening? What about the last 5 days? What about the last 5 days? So sometimes we make this calculation and we say, you know what? If I'm not going to be consistent about it, then it's not worth anything. And it's not true. It's simply not true. Every single time we find the strength to engage with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, every single time I find the strength to daven, every single time I find the strength to learn, every single time I find the strength to keep the mitzvahs, even if I'm not consistent with them, those episodic commitments, those episodic connections are so profound, are so meaningful, and are so greatly appreciated by the Ribono Shalom because he's our Father. And anytime we take the time to connect, even if we don't call him as much as we should, and even if we don't connect as much as we should, when we do, it is meaningful. Yiddishkeit is not an all or nothing. It's not an all or nothing, and we make this mistake all of the time, and we miss out on so many beautiful opportunities because we think to ourselves, well, if I can't do it all the way, if I can't do it perfectly, if I can't commit, then what's the point of trying? What's the point of trying? Bilam saw the point of trying. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov. Because it is better to live in the ohel of spirituality, the tent of connection, the tent of relationship, even for just a few moments, than not to live there at all. You know, it's interesting that Bilam was sometimes able to see the beauty of our relationship with Hashem in ways that we can't see it. Of course, the goal is to be consistent. But lest you think that the absence of consistency means that anything and everything I do is meaningless, chas v'shalom. The words of Bilam ring true in our ears, in our hearts, and in our souls. The goal, of course, is to be the end of the pasuk, Mishkan Osecha Yisrael. Every day I strive to plant myself. Like David HaMelech says, Acho sha'alti me'es Hashem, Hashem, I have one request. Shifti beveis Hashem kol yemei chayai. I want to dwell in the house. I want to be consistent. I want to be constant. I want to be there. That's what I want. That's the goal. But I'm not there yet. Or maybe I'm not there yet. And therefore, where I am right now is in the ohel. Sometimes I show up. Sometimes I don't show up. Sometimes I'm engaged. Sometimes I'm connected. Sometimes I'm inspired. Sometimes I'm enthralled. Sometimes I'm in love. Sometimes, Chesh Baruch Hu, I'm with you. And sometimes I'm not. Never chas v'shalom think that those episodic moments of connection are unimportant. Always remember that whenever we find the courage and the strength to connect with our Father, He is waiting there for us with open arms, with a smile, and with a warm embrace. Bilam saw this. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkin osech Yisrael. May we be zochem Yirtz Hashem to find the strength, even episodically, to come into the ohel, the tent of spirituality. And in Yirtz Hashem, may we zocha one day to get to the goal, to reach the finish line of Mishkan Osecha Yisrael, of permanently planting, consistently planting ourselves in an ongoing, meaningful, and fulfilling relationship with Hashem. Wishing everyone a good and Erev Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.